Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I want to thank you for your unanimous support once again for the resolution recognizing May as ALS Awareness Month. As I have done previously in my role as an advocate for raising awareness of this issue, I'd like to take the opportunity to stand and give a little bit of background on this disease. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. As many of you already know, that is the disease that both of my parents unfortunately succumbed to. At the time of their diagnosis, they were, in the history that we had available at that time, they were one of 8 couples who both came down with the disease after marriage, one of 2 couples that were living at that time. Anecdotally, I've learned of one other married couple who also came down with that disease since that time. And it is something that is extremely rare. The individual rate of occurrence is about 1.25 million. So when you start looking at the statistics, it is something that there's a pretty good chance that we would all deal with at some point in our lives. And particular to the Commonwealth, I want to raise another issue. It's one that I've repeatedly raised during the appropriations hearings as we discuss the impacts that this has on certain aspects of our budget and some of the line items that go towards caring for patients with ALS. And that is this, that veterans are twice as likely to come down with Lou Gehrig's disease. And it is medically documented in a host of peer-reviewed studies. And while they do not know the direct link yet, it is something that we will most likely have to contend with as policymakers as we go forward. The reason is because when you look at the entire scope of the war on terror, we as a Commonwealth had the most deployed National Guardsmen in the country. And because of that, we will have a host of veterans returning to the Commonwealth that may unfortunately have a higher likelihood of this disease. Where we come in as policymakers, one is raising awareness as we're doing today, and 2, we will be in a position where these patients will directly impact our budget in terms, particularly in the Medicaid lines. When you look at this disease, it is enabling, it is always fatal, and because of that, most of these individuals tend to spend down all of their assets and ultimately end up on Medicaid. And one of the initiatives that we've been working on very successfully in a bipartisan way is funding those support services that actually allow people to stay in their homes and to be cared for in that setting as opposed to a nursing home or a long-term care facility, which is much more costly for us, who ultimately usually ends up footing the bill. When you compare the costs of some of the adaptations that you can use to keep people in home, which is a more comfortable place for them where they will get better outcomes, to be several hundred to several $1,000s as opposed to $80,000 or more per year in a long-term care facility, you can quickly see why these kinds of policy decisions will, 1, be important financially, but 2, also be equally important for the patients and their families. I know that the awareness has been raised significantly through the Ice Bucket Challenge, and a lot of folks think we raised millions of dollars for this cause over the last couple years. Why do we continue to need to provide services or even prepare for it? Well, while that was hugely successful, that money is predominantly used for research. While they're making those advances on the research side to where we can hopefully work towards a cure, that we would not have to have ALS Awareness Day anymore. The reality is that the patients like my parents, patients like the veterans I spoke about earlier, will continue to be in the Commonwealth, and we need to ensure that they are cared for because they gave of their time, their efforts, and potentially, in many cases, their lives, like the soldier that we recognized earlier. And when you look at cases like that, I think we owe it to them to make sure that we have a robust and, more importantly, an effective care system in place. So I want to thank you because I know that the advocates, as they make their rounds here in the Capitol, many of them scheduled appointments with you. And for me personally, the fact that you would take time out of your busy schedules, for me, it was in many ways a recognition of not just their efforts and their struggles, but also a recognition of how important that issue is to me, because I recognize how easy it is to have our schedules be jammed up and difficult to make them all, but I am very humbly and I'm very humbled by the amount of support and appreciate the amount of support that all of you have made in terms of making time for people who care about this, such as myself and such as those advocates. So I want to thank you again for the unanimous vote and your continued support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.